You've got 35 years of experience. You've trained people. You've led teams. You've solved problems that 25-year-olds wouldn't even recognize as problems yet. And you're sitting at your kitchen table sending out application number 200 and something and nothing. Not a rejection, not an interview, just silence. Application black hole after application black hole. And then, one day, it actually clicks for you. Not because someone told you, but because you feel it in your bones. One woman put it in just 6 words that I haven't been able to shake. She said she became invisible the moment she turned 60. Invisible. Not underqualified, not behind on skills. Invisible. Like the resume itself stopped registering as a real human being the second a hiring manager did the math on her birth year. Here's the thing. If you're over 50 and job hunting right now, or if you're 45 and quietly terrified this is your future, I need you to know this isn't a personal failing. This is a documented, measurable, worsening pattern in the labor market, and almost nobody is talking about it honestly. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on exactly why late career job loss has become its own unique financial emergency, why the math is so much scarier after 50 than it is at 30, and, most importantly, exactly what you can do right now to protect the nest egg you spent decades building, whether you're already job hunting or just want to be ready if the layoff call ever comes. Hello, I'm Anne. This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal, tax, or financial advice. Let's start with the voices behind this crisis, because the numbers alone don't capture how brutal this actually feels on the ground. A career coach who specializes in helping older professionals find work says she's heard from hundreds of people in this exact situation over just the past 2 years, and the messages she gets are getting worse, not better. One person told her that despite having decades of experience, they couldn't find a job paying more than $20 an hour. Another said they made it to the final round of interviews 5 separate times in their last job search, only to keep getting passed over once their age became obvious. This coach has watched the market for older professionals keep deteriorating, with client after client pointing to age discrimination as the wall they keep slamming into. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. She's seeing a wave of crowdfunding campaigns pop up from people who've lost everything during an extended job search. People who did everything right for 30+ years, completely financially wiped out by an unemployment stretch they never saw coming. Now let's put some hard numbers behind that feeling, because this is where it stops sounding like bad luck and starts looking like a structural pattern. According to AARP, 38% of unemployed workers age 55 and older have been out of work for 27 weeks or longer, more than 6 months. Compare that to workers age 16 to 54, where that same long-term unemployment rate sits at around 16%. Let that sink in. If you're over 55 and you lose your job, you are more than twice as likely to still be unemployed half a year later than someone younger going through the exact same layoff. And here's a stat that genuinely surprised me the first time I saw it. The labor force participation rate, meaning the percentage of people in a given age group who are actually working or actively looking for work, has been falling steeply for workers 55 and older since 2020. It's now down around 37%. Meanwhile, that same participation rate for workers aged 25 to 54 is sitting near historic highs. So while younger workers are working more than almost ever before, older workers are vanishing from the labor force at a pace that should be setting off alarm bells. Some of that is voluntary retirement, but a meaningful chunk of it is something much sadder. People who wanted to keep working, tried to keep working, and eventually just gave up because the hiring market gave them no other choice. Let me tell you about some of the real people behind these numbers, because statistics are easy to scroll past, but stories stick. One financial services professional, 59 years old, with 34 years of experience in the industry, has been job hunting for 17 months with nothing to show for it. 17 months. That's not a rough patch. That's over a year of mounting financial pressure with no end in sight. Another woman, an expert in supply chain work, made a decision that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. She cut 15 years of experience off her resume. 15 years of accomplishments deliberately erased, not because they weren't valuable, but specifically so she'd look younger on paper. Think about how upside down that is. The exact thing that should make her the most qualified candidate in the room, decades of proven expertise, became the thing she had to hide just to get a foot in the door. She and her husband, who was laid off 2 years earlier and still hadn't found new work, ended up downsizing their home and pulling from retirement savings just to keep their heads above water. So here's the obvious question you're probably already asking. Why is this so much worse after 50? Older workers don't necessarily lose jobs more often than younger workers, but the road back to employment afterward is dramatically harder. Let's break down exactly why, because once you see the mechanics, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. First, there's straightforward age bias baked into hiring. Nearly 3/4 of older workers, 74% according to AARP research, believe their age is actively working against them in the hiring process. And almost 1 in 5 say they felt pushed out of a job specifically because of their age. This isn't a fringe feeling held by a paranoid minority. This is the dominant experience among older job seekers. Second, hiring managers carry a set of assumptions about older candidates that are, frankly, lazy and usually wrong. AARP's Vice President of Financial Resilience Programming has pointed out that hiring managers frequently assume older workers are less comfortable with technology, more resistant to change, or simply not worth the investment in additional training. Assumptions that have nothing to do with an individual person's actual ability and everything to do with a stereotype riding shotgun in the hiring process. Third, and this one's purely financial, which somehow makes it feel even colder. Employers often see older applicants as more expensive, higher expected salaries based on experience level, bigger retirement contributions, higher healthcare costs as people age. So a candidate's decades of expertise, the exact thing that should be their biggest selling point, gets quietly recalculated by some employers as a line item cost to avoid instead of a value to capture. Now here's where the metaphor really matters, because I want you to understand why a layoff at 30 and a layoff at 60 are not the same financial event, even though on paper they might look identical. Same job, same salary, same severance package. Think of your retirement savings like a tree that's been growing compound interest as its sunlight for decades. If a storm, a layoff, knocks that tree over when it's young, in your 30s, you've still got decades of growing season left. You can replant, and given enough time, that tree gets just as tall as it would have anyway. But if that same storm knocks the tree over when it's 60 years old, there's no more growing season left to recover the height you lost. The compounding growth that made your nest egg actually grow on its own, year after year, without you lifting a finger. That engine needs time to work. And time is exactly what gets stolen from you the older you are when the storm hits. A financial planner who specializes in retirement strategy put it simply, dipping into retirement savings in your 30s is something you can usually recover from because time is still on your side. Past 50, that safety net disappears. You simply don't have the runway left to rebuild what you've withdrawn. And the timing of all this could not be worse. The cost of living has been climbing. Inflation hit a 3-year high of 4.2% recently, which means every dollar pulled out of a shrinking nest egg buys less than it used to. And layered on top of that, both Social Security and Medicare are facing significant benefit reductions within the next decade if nothing changes in Washington. So the exact financial cushions older Americans are counting on to soften the blow of late career unemployment are themselves projected to shrink. Right around the same time, more older workers are being pushed prematurely into relying on them. AARP's research backs this up directly. Older workers have less runway to rebuild their earnings, their savings, and their overall retirement security after a job loss, or after returning to work at a much lower wage than before. And the compounding effects of that don't stay contained to one bad year. They ripple forward through the rest of someone's retirement. Here's the part that should make you sit up, because it reframes the entire problem. Despite all of this hardship in the job market, basic living expenses, groceries, healthcare, housing remain the number one reason older adults keep working or keep job hunting at all, according to recent AARP data. This isn't about older workers refusing to retire out of stubbornness or boredom. The overwhelming majority are working because they genuinely need the income to cover essentials. So when the job market shuts the door on them, the fallout isn't optional belt tightening. It's people getting forced into early Social Security claims that permanently reduce their monthly benefit, or draining retirement accounts that were specifically built to last through their 70s and 80s. Money meant for 20 or 30 years from now, gone in 20 or 30 months instead. Let's pause on that less tech-savvy assumption for a second, because it deserves to be picked apart, not just mentioned in passing. Think about who actually lived through the biggest technology shifts of the last 40 years. The 55-year-old in that interview chair learned to use a computer at work before email even existed, then adapted to email, then adapted to the internet replacing fax machines, then adapted to smartphones replacing desktops, then adapted to remote work software nobody had heard of in 2019. That's not someone who struggles with change. That's someone with an unmatched track record of adapting to change over and over for decades. Meanwhile, a 24-year-old candidate has lived through exactly one of those transitions, if that. So the stereotype isn't just unkind, it's backwards. The group being quietly written off as resistant to new tools is, by any honest measure, the group with the longest proven history of successfully learning new tools. That's the kind of gap between perception and reality that should make you angry on behalf of every qualified person getting filtered out by an assumption instead of an actual skills test. And that gap between perception and reality is exactly why this problem persists, even though it's measurable, well-documented, and openly discussed in research circles. Bias doesn't need to be conscious or malicious to shape outcomes. A hiring manager skimming 200 resumes in an afternoon isn't sitting there thinking, I dislike older workers. They're pattern matching under time pressure, and the pattern they've absorbed, fairly or not, nudges an experienced 58-year-old's resume toward the discard pile a little faster than a 29-year-old's resume with half the experience. Multiply that small nudge across thousands of hiring decisions happening every single day across the country, and you get exactly the labor market data we just walked through. Longer unemployment stretches, falling participation rates, and people quietly editing their own work history just to survive the filter. Now let's get into what you can actually do about it, because awareness without action doesn't pay anybody's mortgage. The first piece of advice might sound counterintuitive, maybe even a little deflating. But stick with me, because the math behind it is genuinely smart. Don't be afraid to take lower pay if it stops the bleeding. A certified financial planner who runs a retirement-focused advisory firm framed it perfectly. If your monthly expenses run around $5,000 and you land a job paying $1,500 a month, you haven't solved the whole problem, but you've shrunk it dramatically. You've gone from a $5,000 monthly drain on your savings down to a $3,500 problem. That's not nothing. That's potentially the difference between your nest egg lasting 5 more years or 15 more years. A lot of older workers are making exactly this trade right now, stepping into part-time or lower skill roles specifically to stop the monthly hemorrhaging, even if it stings the ego a little. Ego is expensive. Compounding interest is not. Choose wisely. Second, and this one is non-negotiable. Protect your health insurance like it's the most valuable asset you own. Because in a real sense, it is. If you're job hunting, prioritize roles that come with medical benefits, even over slightly higher pay elsewhere. Paying full out-of-pocket premiums, or worse, getting hit with an uncovered medical emergency, can cost you tens of thousands of dollars in a single event, instantly wiping out years of careful saving. One bad health scare without coverage can undo a decade of disciplined retirement planning in a single hospital visit. Third, and this is the rule I want you to tattoo onto your decision-making process, Protect your retirement accounts at almost any cost. Because the growth you lose by withdrawing early is brutally difficult, sometimes impossible, to ever recover. Before you touch a 401k, exhaust the other options first. Call your mortgage company and ask about temporary forbearance or a hardship plan. Call your landlord and ask about a temporarily reduced rate. These conversations feel uncomfortable, sure, but they're a whole lot less painful than realizing 5 years from now that the money you pulled out at 60 could have been worth twice as much by the time you actually needed it at 75. And fourth, this one's for anyone currently employed, reading the writing on the wall, or just being smart about the future. Build what I'd call a layoff plan, the same way you'd build an emergency fund, except this one's made of preparation instead of cash. Keep your resume updated continuously, not just when you're suddenly job hunting in a panic. Stay active in your professional network before you need a favor from it. Look into certifications or skills that strengthen your position while you're still collecting a paycheck and have the bandwidth to actually pursue them. The entire point of a layoff plan is removing the worst part of unemployment, the part where you're trying to figure out your next move while you're emotionally raw, financially anxious, and scrambling all at the same time. Build the plan now, while you're calm, so that future version of you isn't starting completely from scratch in crisis mode. Here's my honest take, and I say this because this issue genuinely frustrates me every time I dig into it. The people getting squeezed out of this job market are not the problem. They didn't get lazy. They didn't stop learning. They didn't suddenly become incapable at 55 after being perfectly capable at 35. What changed is how the hiring system perceives them, and that's a bias problem, not a competence problem. But here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of that righteous frustration. You can't always fix a broken hiring system from your side of the table. What you can control is how prepared your finances are for the version of this crisis you might face. And that preparation is the difference between someone who weathers a brutal job search with their retirement intact and someone who ends up in a GoFundMe campaign at 63. So here's what I want you to do, starting today. If you're currently job hunting, take an honest look at your monthly expenses and figure out the actual number you'd need from a stopgap job to stop the bleeding, even if it's not your dream role, even if it's a fraction of your old salary. If you're currently employed, spend 30 minutes this week updating your resume and reconnecting with 2 people in your network, just in case. And if you're anywhere near retirement accounts feeling tempting right now, make one phone call first to your mortgage company, your landlord, or a financial advisor before you touch a single dollar of that compounding growth you can't easily get back. Because the goal isn't just surviving this job market. The goal is making it through to the other side with your savings, your health coverage, and your sense of self-worth all still intact. Because none of those should have an expiration date tied to your birthday. And if you're someone who's currently on the other side of the hiring table, a manager, a recruiter, someone with actual influence over who gets the interview, let this be the moment you double-check your own assumptions. The candidate with the longest resume in the stack isn't a liability sitting in your inbox. They're very possibly the only person in that pile who's already proven, repeatedly across decades, that they can learn, adapt, and deliver under pressure. That's not a risk. That's the closest thing to a guarantee you're going to find in a hiring process built on guesswork. If this video helped you see your own situation a little more clearly, or helped you understand what a parent or older friend might be going through right now, share it with them. And if you want more breakdowns on the financial realities nobody's honest about until you're standing right in the middle of them, make sure you're subscribed because there's a lot more of this conversation still to have.